Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup. CNN had Cornel West on last night, and perhaps unsurprisingly, seemed that after allowing him to give his views on poor and working people, why he was running, seemed they quickly wanted to shift into the real reason to have him on, which was start to push him to drop out at some point. Can't make it up. Now, let's start with host Kaitlan Collins bringing up Jill Stein and the whole spoiler narrative from 2016 that she somehow helped elect Donald Trump.
I'm glad you brought up Jill Stein because you know the counter argument here. Jill Stein's actually helping you with this run. And 7 years ago, when she was the Green Party candidate, Hillary Clinton's world blamed her in part for that loss. And Democrats are worried you're going to play that role this time around. So what do you say to people, to Democrats who are worried you'll tip the election for Donald Trump?
Well, I just say that it's simply not true. I mean, I have great respect. I have great respect for my dear brother Ralph Nader. I have great respect for Sister Jill Stein. I have great respect for my dear brother Jamu Baraka. Meaning what? Meaning that the Democratic Party is so unsocratic as well as undemocratic. I'm still upset because they didn't treat my dear brother Bernie right twice. But they're unsocratic. Examine yourself. Examine why it is you did not speak to the issues of poor and working people, and therefore you lost. If you'd rather lose than really change and examine yourself, then you're going to have third parties popping up all over the place because people are suffering out here. You got mass incarceration. You got ghettos and hoods and barrios and reservations. You got 60% of our fellow citizens barely making it every month. And what's the discourse? We want to win the next election and we're concerned about the spoiler. Hey, I thought you were concerned about public life. I thought you were concerned about the quality of the life of citizens. And I speak as a Christian, which is the least of these, the 25th chapter of Matthew, the orphans, the widow, the fatherless, the motherless, the marginalized, the subjugated. That's my legacy. That's the legacy that I attempt to enact in my own fallible way as a cracked vessel.
So very interesting, not shocked she brought up the Jill Stein narrative, the spoiler effect. It actually isn't true, according to polls, which CNN has a research department, producers. They could look at this. Most Jill Stein voters just wouldn't have voted if they didn't vote for Jill Stein. So there's no data or evidence to indicate that those voters would have went to Hillary Clinton, but they don't want to be bothered with that. But I don't know. It seems that a natural follow-up when Cornel West is criticizing the Democratic Party for not actually giving the voters that might consider him a reason to vote for them, a natural question from Kaitlan Collins. It is her first week with this show, so we'll give her a little bit of a break there. But a natural question would be, well, are there specific actions you think Joe Biden or the Democratic Party could take from now until the general election that might convince people that they care about the working class, convince people that they care about the poor, maybe persuade people to, vote for Joe Biden rather than you? That would be a natural question, but I'll tell you how this works because I worked at Fox and MSNBC. She's got a producer in her ear. Not to say she can't craft questions herself, but she's got a producer in her ear. They don't want to have a lot of airtime to talk about poverty and hoods and barrios and, what's really going on in America. They want to keep up the facade of, everything's dandy and it's a great economy. And just yesterday on CNN, you had a clip with a multimillionaire William Cohen, a former, vice president at JP Morgan, saying, I don't get it. The economy is doing dandy. And then you had fellow millionaire anchor John Berman saying, do people just like complaining? Are people just kind of like being unhappy? So that was on CNN's air yesterday. Let's take a listen to that.
We did get a thread question from Professor Peacock. He goes, I'd like to see you explore why people think the economy is bad when the economic data says otherwise. You saw those poll numbers. People think it's bad.
I don't have an explanation for why people think it's bad because objectively it is good. It's hard to imagine it could be much better. It truly is. I mean, yes, inflation could be lower, but unemployment could hardly be lower. The economy, our economy is growing. Our GDP is growing. Interest rates, were ratcheted up quickly beginning in March of 2021 and 2022. I would have thought, frankly, that would slow the economy down a lot faster and further than it has, which just goes to prove it takes a long time for higher interest rates to work their way into the economy. But, bankruptcies are not, exploding left and right. The economy is still growing. I don't know. Looks pretty good to me.
Do you think there's an element, people just like being unhappy?
People like being unhappy about a lot of things in America right now, and unfortunately.
Okay, so if you're not nauseated enough, like I said, they could have asked Cornel West what specific actions could President Biden take to convince the people considering you or third parties to vote for him. Let's see what she asked instead. And no, we're not making this up.
Yeah, so you're saying essentially you think that Democrats, well, not just Democrats, but that they have the wrong message. If you're looking at this at the election, it comes down to the wire. You're polling at, say, 2 or 3% in key battleground states. What do you do? Do you ultimately back President Biden like you did in 2020? Or what would you do in that scenario, do you think?
Well, I mean, part of the challenge, my dear sister, is that, you got Trump. He's certainly a gangster, neo-fascist. He's, in many ways, promoting, if not promoting, that's too strong a word. But one effect of his work is to move toward a second civil war. With Biden, he's better in some ways on domestic issues, but he's leading us toward a third world war. So if we choose between the second civil war and the third world war, where are we? We're between a rock and a hard place. And that's where so many of us find ourselves, unable to really acknowledge the ways in which our system itself is just so toxic. The organized greed at the top, just hemorrhaging the best. The indifference, the levels of hatred and revenge. All I'm doing is saying is, hey, let us try another way that Fannie Lou Hamer already taught us, which is one of love and justice and community and solidarity with the least of these, and organizing and having strikes against organized greedy bosses, and then trying to somehow keep our democracy alive and dismantle the empire. See, I want to head the empire in order to dismantle it. We don't need 800 military units around the world. We don't need U.S. troops in over 100 countries. We need to be a nation among nations. We don't need to be the grand empire that every nation has to bow down to. I'm anti-empire, anti-imperialist in that sense, very much like Mark Twain and the most adorable American philosopher, William James.
So he just told you, like 3 minutes ago, maybe the Democratic Party needs to look inward. Maybe the Democratic Party needs to ask itself, why are so many people looking for a third option? Why are so many poor and working class people fed up with the Democratic Party? Again, maybe she could ask, are there specific actions Biden can take from now till Election Day? Executive actions, pledges he will make, let per se, if you reelect me in a Democratic House and Senate, we're going to raise the minimum wage to $20 an hour, and to hell with the parliamentarian. I am making the solemn promise now that we're going to get it done, and there's no arcane rules that are going to stop us and no unelected parliamentarian that's going to stop us. Instead of asking that, in a nice, soft way, she asked, well, let's say, comes down to the wire and you're at 2 to 3% in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Well, you just step aside and support Biden. Seems like she had an agenda in this interview, dare I say, with all these reports coming out about Democrats melting down, freaking out, about the threat of third party Cornel West, and the fact that a lot of Democratic operatives and donors don't really like the pace of this Biden campaign, as in there is no campaign. He's not even talking about going out and campaigning until the fall. Very interesting that seems that they were more interested in basically having Cornel West on, exchanging pleasantries, pretending they care about why he's running, but then getting right to the point of, will you drop out and support Biden when it comes down to it? To be honest, he did not answer. I don't think he would, but he didn't answer. So, maybe we'll do a follow-up and ask him that. Lastly, they turned to Ukraine, Russia, and basically moved to try and link Cornel West as a Putin bro.
I'm glad you brought up NATO, because you tweeted earlier this week that you believe NATO is what provoked Russia into invading Ukraine. As you know, that is the argument President Putin makes, and one that the U.S. forcefully rejects. I know that you don't think the U.S. should be involved, but if you got elected, what would you accept in terms of a ceasefire in Ukraine?
Well, one, I've got my massive critiques of Putin, though. There's no doubt about it. But we're not talking about personalities here. We're talking about how the United States promised Gorbachev, towering statesman, that they would not move 1 inch toward Russia. And we end up right now 800 miles on the border of Russia. And we know how empires behave, Sister Kaitlan. If Russia had missiles in Mexico and Canada, the United States government would probably blow them to smithereens, because that's how empires behave. We had the same challenge in Cuba in 1962. So what we end up with a criminal invasion. And I know some of my left-wing comrades who know it's an invasion. Criminal invasion, but a criminal invasion provoked by the expansion of NATO, which is an instrument of U.S. global power. And we have to be able to conceive of a world when we look at China, when we look at Russia, when we look at Ethiopia, when we look at Haiti, when we look at Brazil, we got to see precious human beings rather than these competitive nation states that are trying to devour more profits, more land, and more territory. Can we conceive of such a world? Can we pursue such a world? I think we have to. What's at stake? The destruction of the species, the destruction of the planet, the destruction of democracies as we know it.
But
so we're cutting against the grain, but always with a smile.
Practically speaking, what would you accept in Ukraine? Like what? I mean, Trump claims he could fix it in 24 hours. What would that look like for you?
Oh, what I would do, I would bring in the Chinese, the Turks, the African rulers. I would sit down with the Ukrainian leaders and say, we must stop this war, stop these war crimes, the cluster bombs on a variety of different parties, and make sure that we begin a diplomatic process for a just peace. And that just peace is going to have some serious concessions across the board. Russian troops have to leave. There's going to be debates over the territory. There's going to be some kind of concessions over the territory, but stop the killing. Why? Because the Ukrainian brothers and sisters are precious, and they are bearing so much of the suffering with this proxy war between the American empire and the Russian Federation. So there's responsibility and blame across the board, but the American empire does bear a significant responsibility here, even though there's not the sole or exclusive responsibility, and it's in no way a pro-Putin. People say, oh, you must be siding with Putin. No, please. No, not at all. I'm trying to be morally consistent. I want to be a person that has some integrity and honesty and critique, self-critique and critique of others in a spirit of fallibility.
This is the best answer I've heard on this issue. Better than Marianne Williamson and better than RFK Jr., who suddenly has become anti-war after supporting Hillary Clinton 3 times. And as far as I can tell, not having a long track record of being anti-war. He does have a long track record of being pro-establishment and part of the establishment, but I digress. Notice that in the framing of her question, she said, you basically think that Russia was provoked into this, which is basically echoing President Putin. So she was trying to basically make him a pro-Putin, Russian apologist for the CNN audience, which is pretty much Democratic based, some independents, a lot of older people who are not, particularly fond of Russia because of the Cold War hysteria they came up in and brainwashing. But he's telling the truth and he's calling it what it is. 2 things could be true at once. I know nuance is not popular these days in a very polarized, tribal, digital media, cable news environment. But yeah, it was an illegal invasion. He's not condoning what Putin did. But at the same time, let's not pretend that Russia has not been lied to for 30 years since the fall of the Soviet Union, where they were promised, Gorbachev was promised, that NATO would not move an inch past reunified Germany, would not move towards Russia. That went out the window decades ago. And he pointed out, what would America do with missiles on its border? So he's telling the truth. There has been provocations. Russia is not completely wrong. They do have a real reason to feel threatened, to feel lied to. They do have legitimate grievances. However, that does not condone an illegal invasion. this is not really allowed. This certainly would not be allowed on MSNBC, which might as well be, Rachel Maddow might as well be the Joe McCarthy of 2020, the 2020s, and start recruiting for the Un-American Activities Committee. But this is true. So basically, in 10 minutes, in a nice smiley way, because she's a nice one, Kaitlan Collins. She's basically saying, "Will you bend the knee, drop out? If it's even plausible, you could tip the election with 2 to 3% towards Donald Trump." And basically, why are you towing the line with Putin, you Russian apologist? Cornel West, being the nice guy he is, everybody's a brother or sister, he handled it well. But this is what you're going to go through. On one end, it's good. He's getting media exposure because of his name, his reputation. Obviously, outlets want to have him on. But on the other end, they are already pushing for him to go away and trying to paint him as basically either a Putin apologist, a spoiler, et cetera, et cetera. We'll see if there's ever a CNN town hall with Cornel West. I'm not holding my breath. They've had a town hall with Chris Christie and others who are polling at 1%. Cornel West is polling higher than him. You would think, based on data and consistency, they would have a town hall with Cornel West. What do you think?